We are live.
Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Atomics' Founder Hacks podcast. It's time for us to talk about things we've seen this week, things we've read, and something we've learned. As ever, very big welcome to Mr. Anthony Enright.
Hello.
And to Mr. Alex Moore.
Good morning, Ben.
Good morning. Very zen, Mr. Moore, as ever. I love it. So, shall we get cracked into it? I think Alex is going to kick us off with something you've seen this week that sort of pricked your interest. So please enlighten us, Alex. What have you seen this week?
Yeah, well, obviously we try and break down our ramblings into three sections: seen, read, and learned. So yeah, I'll kick off with a scene, which is bizarrely something we were all witness to last week. It relates to a call we were on with a founder of a business who we know quite well, who will remain nameless because we like to keep things anonymous on this show. And he was talking about an amazing achievement he achieved in May, where he ran 10 kilometers every single day. And then he was talking about, it was an amazing goal. He set himself the goal of doing this. And then he said, feeling a bit down because since then I haven't really done very much. And then he's just sort of musing about himself. I tend to, I've got to figure out why I can do this amazing thing. And then I struggle on the day to day of maintaining a discipline. And it just made me think that it just tied in with this book I'm reading at the moment, Atomic Habits, about habits rather than goals. It's a little bit of a controversial one to throw out there, but there's this whole concept of goals are bad, habits are good. And that's the thing that I really saw, and I thought that made a lot of sense to me. And that's the thing when I thought I would like to talk about that in the podcast. The idea behind all this, in the premise of the book, is goals are temporary things. You aim for goals, and they can make you very unhappy and flat when you reach them. So by focusing on habits, systems, and processes, it can be a lot more fulfilling. Falling in love with the process, not the product, as he puts it. And I thought it was very interesting, and I wanted to throw it out there for a bit of debate with you two fine gentlemen, because I found it very difficult to disagree with him. Although I think goals has its place, and for me, I've always used goals in businesses that I've created, probably to help me more as a signpost rather than a destination I wanted to get to. And I think just to say, don't set goals, it's a pretty dangerous thing for a founder of a business. But for me, I've used goals as signposts, and then I've very much focused on the habits and processes and systems so that I can enjoy the sort of journey of aiming in the direction of those goals. I hope that makes sense. So, a bit of a controversial one, chaps. But
it's really good. I love this one and sort of want to jump on it because it's a suspicion that I've had for a long time that there's so much stuff out there that I think sets expectations of what you're supposed to be like if you're a founder of a business. And I find that fascinating. And one of the things that I think definitely I've felt over the years, and I think many people have, besieged by, is this almost fanatical worship of the goal. Everything has to be a goal the whole time.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious about it because I completely agree that I think, goals...
BHAGs.
BHAGs. And whilst I do think they have a role, don't get me wrong, I do think that if you don't have the right sort of attitude towards them, it can lead to a great deal of unhappiness. And it's almost where people start to do that thing of, I'll be happy when, I'll be happy if.
Yeah.
I can't be happy until we've achieved this thing, or when we've got this thing, then I'll be happy or satisfied. And I just think that sometimes you're quite right, thinking of it as more of a journey that you're choosing as well as a goal. And I remember an article I think I shared with you, Alex, a long time ago called Choose Your Pain.
Oh, I love it.
When you're choosing a goal, I have to dig it out. when you choose a goal, be careful, because you may not be choosing to have the outcome of the goal. You may simply be choosing the pain of pursuing it, and one must be very thoughtful and careful about the goals you pick. So no, it definitely resonates. Whilst I do still think that goals have a role to play in terms of setting that direction. What do you think, Anthony? Because I know you do a lot of work with people around goals and
a huge amount of work, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they work hand in hand, and you've got to have a goal. You've got to know where you want to be and set the journey as to how you're going to get there. But I think that the biggest issue here that I see is that when you get there, people are completely unfulfilled, and people don't often celebrate the victory either. What tends to happen is they become so goal focused that they get to that point, and the immediate thing that comes to mind is, what's the next goal, rather than celebrating the victory at that point. So I think they've got to be hand in hand, but I absolutely agree that you've got to fall in love with the process, and you've got to fall in love with that journey and what that gives you along the way toward that goal. So if that goal is something tangible that you need within your life, then that's the outcome of that. But actually to fall in love with the journey along the way is the fulfilling bit. I don't think the actual goal is the... People don't celebrate the victories, so it's not as fulfilling.
I'm with you. I think, actually, as for victory, I remember that quote from that document you shared with me, Ben, all those years ago, and it was talking about the boxer that's in love with the battle, not the victory. And I think as a founder, this whole thing about, you get to work and you come on, bring it on, next thing, bring it on. And you enjoy the day to day, not this fixation on the goal, which is, this whole idea of once I reach my goal, then I'll be happy. And the problems with a goal first mentality is that I find I can be continually putting happiness off until the next milestone. And that doesn't work for me. That doesn't energize me enough to put up with all the crap that you have to deal with when you're a founder of a business. So
completely. I mean, and of course that projects to your teams as well. I mean, one of the things that I know a lot of founders is almost this feeling of relentlessness that can come. The experience of working for some founders, I know, can be quite tough, and it is, because I think most of us who do this very strange thing of starting businesses probably do have that relentless drive. And I mean, so resonates with me, Anthony, what you just shared there, because I know it's a sin of mine constantly that I've had the feedback many times that actually, Ben, it would be really lovely if we could just sit and smell the flowers and celebrate what we've achieved before you set off on the next mountain we're going to conquer.
And that's the problem with entrepreneurs, isn't it? We're always looking at what's next.
Yeah.
And certainly if you're being coached through this, you're coached to have a SMART goal so it's achievable. So it's maybe a smaller piece to the bigger pie for you. So once you've achieved that, it's just the next step and the next step. So actually for those process and procedures internally to be, enjoyable, and for there to be, you get your kicks from that process is an alternative to getting the kick out of the goal itself.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
Well, it's lovely as well. And again, so much of what I'm hearing from you both here is very emotive language. And I think it is, we're talking about you falling in love with the process, and I think it is that visceral nature of being a founder that perhaps informs this, and how again that has to be a choice for all of us. But look, I'll press us forward, because I think this does connect with the next piece that we were going to talk about, and I think you've got a read for us. Is that right? And something you
I have, forgive me, because as you guys know, I don't listen to a lot of the news. I've sort of removed that out of my life. So what I've decided to do is have one or two various places that I just catch up with things on a weekly basis. So I'm informed, but I'm not overrun by all the news, the constant news cycle, and distracted by that constant news cycle. So this is an article from the Sunday Times again, because I do read the business section of the Sunday Times. And it's a really interesting article, and it's about Willie Walsh, the CEO of the IAG Group, or as most people would know, British Airways, part of the the group that British Airways is part of. And there's no doubt that the way in which the article is written, he's been set up to a degree by the journalists in question. But as most of you know, British Airways have just made 12,000 people redundant. And the remaining 30,000 people have got to reapply for their jobs. And for me, it's probably more emotive because I live in West London. I've always lived in West London. Heathrow Airport has always been the hub for employment for people that I grew up with, family, friends, my rugby club, etc., etc. Heathrow Airport is, and it's incredibly emotive, right, because of the third runway, etc., etc. So here we have a CEO of a huge organisation that's made 12,000 people redundant, 30,000 people. The rest have got to reapply for their jobs. And apparently, the first thing that was discussed with the journalists was his order to a wine company for champagne to celebrate Liverpool's victory in the football.
Ouch.
And maybe he was set up, maybe he wasn't. But I just thought, oh my goodness, it's just, there's no class to that whatsoever. There's just something completely uncaring about that. Because that definitely came up in the conversation, whether it was at the beginning or whether or not. Why, do we have to be, I've got to choose my words very carefully here because I don't want to swear, but do we have to be like that? Whether we're entrepreneurs of small to medium-sized businesses or entrepreneurs or leaders of big businesses, do we have to be that way, where we're completely uncaring about the people that work in our organisation? And I know at times I've been guilty myself about, in the way that I'm potentially have managed people in the past and certainly salespeople, and that's tricky. And I may not have been the nicest guy, the nicest boss to work for at times because of pressures that were there. But 12,000 redundancies, 30,000 people that have got to reapply for their jobs, and yet we're boasting about our champagne order to celebrate Liverpool's victory.
Wasn't he having a go at Richard Branson as well? So?
Yeah, it continued. It got worse. Just saying, how much his disdain for Richard Branson and certain things that he'd do to Richard Branson, if the article was to be believed. And that, we all know other CEOs, certainly within that same industry and potentially of the same nationality, who come out and say very similar things I think at times to be provocative. But I suppose the question that I asked is, leaders of businesses have quite a bad reputation. And do you have to be that way in order to be a successful leader?
I think it's a really good point. I mean, and I do think, again, it sort of connects to what we've just talked about in terms of these myths, these legends, tropes, if you like, that circulate around what founders and business types should be like, and whether it's about the sort of the performance masquerade we see on Dragon's Den, that this is how business people are, we're tough, and and of course actually, when you think about it, I mean, for me certainly it runs very counter to my experience actually, that founders who lead their business with kindness, with thoughtfulness, and sometimes making tough decisions, no doubt, but doing so with a degree of class, if you like, if we're allowed to, are we allowed to say that? I don't know, but a degree of compassion and thoughtfulness, they get better business outcomes, don't they? That's been my experience. It's almost like, how many entrepreneurs are out there sort of pretending to be this business person that the media and the sort of myths and legends say they should.
I think that whole thing. I always think Hollywood movie, and they show a meeting in a big boardroom, and it's just always like that's so crap. Or how people use computers. It just makes me laugh. No one ever gets a typo, or it's just this, and the keyboard goes, and all these amazing CCTV angles come in Angola or something. So this sort of the portrayal of how powerful people should behave in a meeting or in business. It's all, it's very, very fake. And I think fake is, people sniff it out and see it in a moment. And I think being genuine, being a good human being is also good business. And I think having a little bit of class, having a little, especially, when you are making the difficult decisions that you have to make as a founder, either make people redundant or fire people. There's another mutual friend of ours who one of my favorite lines is execute with grace. And I think a certain Mr. Willie Walsh, he should maybe remember that sometimes when he's sitting drinking his champagne in his very expensive house. I wonder if part of that is he's about to retire as well, but who knows? Might be a swan song. But yeah.
Well, we have to say, I think I would just invoke Anthony's point as well. Of course, this is about a portrayal of a man, and we should be respectful that there is some journalistic positioning here, which I think is part of the problem as well, because that journalist is probably motivated to reinforce certain tropes, certain stereotypes that sell papers. So we don't know, but it is that betrayal, isn't it, that I think I wonder how that affects founders. I wonder when one starts a business, and I'd probably own it myself and say there were probably things that were sat in my head, unuseful things sat in my head when I first led businesses that you sort of actually, no, don't really need to do that. This sort of self-expectation of, now I've got to be really tough and really Mr. Big Billy, what's it, and choosing my words. I should say we successfully navigated the profane language filter on iTunes when I uploaded our last podcast. So I'd like to keep to that record.
We don't often maintain that protocol when we speak offline, but anyway, yes.
I'm reminded as we're talking through this as well of actually the complete opposite to that of Greg Dyke when he was at the BBC, and he made a stand, and people in the business really respected him. And when he made that stand, they all came out for him. They all left their offices, they all protested, and they backed him up because ultimately he had got their trust, right? They trusted him. He was the leader that they would run through brick walls for. And you get so much more, don't you? And it's so much more enjoyable, right? When to our earlier points, it's so much more enjoyable when you get a group of people. Yes, you don't always make the popular decisions, but when people know that it comes from a good place, that they understand. I think most people understand that leaders have to make tough decisions, but it's where it comes from. It's the place it comes from. And I think the more that you can do things, and I think Greg Dyke absolutely epitomised that at that time, that people will come out for you. They will forgive you for those decisions. They will understand those decisions because ultimately they trust you and they know that you're doing it for the good of the company and maybe for the good of them too, even though it may not always seem like that.
I like it. Powerful Would that be a good time to talk about learned, Mr. Thomas?
Well, yes, and I think it's me, isn't it, this time on the learned. And again, I this was a learn that really struck me this week, and again, similar to Alex last week, perhaps it's about me. So it's a genuine confession, and I guess to share the situation and the learning from it. So I'm more of an introverted type, which you both know, and this means that a lot of my processing and thinking I tend to do inside my own head and on my own. And I often, if people want to understand the difference between extroversion and introversion, I often like to say, I totally, I'm sort of jealous sometimes of extroverted people who I understand live in this world of bright colours. The world around them is incredible and beautiful and stimulating. And of course, what I often have to say to them is they will never quite appreciate how beautiful, stunning and multicolour the inside of my own head is for me. But of course, so one of the things that can sometimes cause is that I tend not to share or submit things to talk out loud. And I guess for me, I did that for the past couple of weeks with a particular challenge, particular problem. I wasn't talking it out loud. I was stuck with wrestling with it in my own head. And I sort of started to question, like, why am I not sharing this? And I think I was probably not sharing it for fear of sounding completely mad. Because actually, I was getting so wrapped up in this problem, I felt it was sort of, I was driving myself crazy with it. And it was interesting because as I started to share this, it sort of reminded me that anyone who's involved in starting or leading businesses, founders particularly, in many ways it is an act of madness to start a business. Why would you want to do it, really? I mean, it's crazy. I was reminded, I think a story one of you guys shared with me, that of course, if you look at the research and you ask people, so why did you start this business? And people will talk about more freedom. They'll talk about wanting more money. They'll talk about more opportunity, control of their own time, which, of course, I think you'd probably agree with me in our experience of being in that situation is the complete opposite of what it feels like to start a business, which usually involves, burning every hour you can and probably having not very much money for quite a long time, and constantly worrying about it. So there is this sort of, we are a strange breed, I think, those of us that get ourselves into this business. So I guess the breakthrough I had was I did sort of go, do you know what? I'm going to sound a bit bonkers talking about this. I probably am a bit bonkers, really, if I'm honest.
A bit?
And just a bit. You tell me. But I sort of just gave myself a bit of permission for that to be okay. And with a very special group of people, I was able to allowed to sound completely crazy for about 10-15 minutes sharing this particular problem. Two things happened. I learned two things. The first thing was that even as an introvert, sometimes there is an advantage to talking a problem through out loud. And for me, that did two things. It forced me to listen to myself and go, oh, flipping heck, steady on, mate. You need to, your thinking is really disorganized here as much as you might think otherwise. And of course, the second thing is it suddenly gives you access to all these extra brains to do that processing with you. And that's got to be more powerful. So my learn was that actually, even if you think you're going to sound completely barking mad, sometimes allowing yourself to do that and go, do you know what, I'm not really ready to share it. I don't really know what I want to say. I'm really confused. I'm going to sound like a bit of an idiot. But do it anyway. Have those relationships in your life where you can do that. And do you know what? For me, at least in this situation, I got a bit of a breakthrough. I got a new realization that really moved the problem on a long way, and some real tangible actions. So look,
yeah, I love it, Ben, because there's so many things you've said that I want to respond to, and then I'll let Alex come in. But I think the first thing is, as I've got older, I've just realized that we're all a bit broken, right? We're all a bit mad. And I think when I was a lot younger, you think, yeah, I'm, maybe you think you're perfect, maybe you don't. But actually that acceptance, and we've spoken lots about that in the past, of just that we're all a bit broken. And actually I think you know me, that I am more of the extrovert. This sort of lockdown, I'm very, very lucky in lots and lots of ways, but I'm definitely struggling not being out and seeing people. And, so I am that person that if I'm going for a run or a walk or a cycle, I will say hello to you, having never met you before, And I'm actually a little bit jealous of, the introverts, Ben, and one of the first things you said when we entered lockdown was, actually, I'm rather enjoying this. This is this is lovely for me. So for me, I can't work anything out in my head. It just, and it's frustrating for those loved ones around me. The only way I can work things out is by verbalizing them. It's just by talking it through. And as we've discovered before, as we talk things through, we quite often come up with the solutions. We may not even need the other person to comment. It's just that opportunity to do it. So actually, I did, Alex and I bore witness to that last week through that process, and it was just fantastic to see. And for me, it leads to the point that who are those people in your life that you can do that with? And I now have. I started off with one. And I paid somebody, if you like, to go through that process. And now I have almost an army of people that I can go to, depending on the subject, or depending on, I can't go to that person because I bent their ear on this last week, so I better pick somebody else, just so they get a break from the incessant ramblings of me. But I love the outcome, ultimately. I love the outcome, that once you're able to verbalize, work things through, I think there's two things. One is, you come up with the answers a lot yourself, but also by having that other person listen and just maybe ask you the odd question you hadn't thought of. You know, you can come to some really different outcomes than you may have done otherwise. So yeah, I'm a huge fan.
Very cool. Very cool.
Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's key. I mean, when we sit down and discuss what we're going to talk about in our podcast, we do it every Monday, and I love we give a little heading to each topic, and Ben's was "Permission to be mad, sir." I just thought that was it was brilliant, and yeah, I think "Permission to be mad, sir," and I think that articulation. But the key thing that you brought up, Anthony, was who you share this to. Permission to be mad to whom? And I think if you've got somebody there, people who are good at listening, and that's sadly is quite a rare art. People who will listen to you, and the thing, especially when you like someone, the natural instinct I find is you want to offer someone advice, but often the thing to do is just to find a good listener to download on. And I was very fortunate to be a Samaritan when I lived in Hong Kong for a little while, a couple of years, and used to speak to some people in some very desperate situations. And the training program to become a Samaritan is unbelievable, and it was all about the art of listening. And I have to be so grateful that I spent that time as a Samaritan, because it really, really helped me to listen and be a good listener. And those are the people that I turn to in my dark hours of whatever's going on in my life, are the people who are good listeners, not the people who give good advice. Because I don't know about advice. It's a pretty dangerous thing, really, and ultimately, perhaps inside you are all the answers you ever could possibly need. So that was my little thought on that one, gentlemen.
Well, I think it's useful, and of course, I mean, again, I'm using some language here that perhaps in a different conversation I wouldn't necessarily use, because there is a serious point to it, which is that founders, amongst most people in life these days, but we're here to talk about founders, are subject to some really intense pressures, and those pressures can take their toll. And making sure one is you can take some responsibility for your own mental health, and you can do some stuff to preserve your mental health, I think is increasingly becoming something that we're all able to talk about, and I think that's huge. I remember the story, and you both know it, but I'll share it, of the origins of that we've mentioned before in our podcast, the forum we used to be in, and of course the origins of that were a group of people who all ran their own businesses, would meet regularly, and ultimately one of them took their own life, and because of the pressure that this person was under, and actually before he did that, he wrote to all of them saying thank you, and that actually that support had been an imperative part of actually him going as far as he could, and whilst it didn't end in the way you would hope, it was very sad. It reminded everybody of the importance for founders, amongst everybody, but founders are what we're here to talk about, to have that support in their lives, and whether it is, as you say, Anthony, something that you pay for, or whether it's something that you ensure is there in other ways in your life. A jokey title in terms of Permission to be Mad, Sir, but there is a truth in there as well, isn't there, about the bigger points. Anthony, do you want to say
and I just think, to add to that, I just wonder if there's anybody listening, if there's anyone listening.
Your mum.
Yeah, apart from my mum.
Hello, Mrs. Enright. How are you?
If you're in that sort of position and you may be new to entrepreneurship, or you're new to running a business, and like I did, you think that you can't ask other entrepreneurs, you can't ask other founders, because that sort of, all that knowledge is sacrosanct, and in that sort of position where they just won't want to share. As soon as I realized that I needed some help and needed some advice, which was a long time, it was probably like 13 years of running a business before I realized that I needed external help and support, and which is where the Entrepreneurs Organization came along, is that I am amazed and outstanding. I'm amazed by the amount of people willing to share and say, oh, when that happened to me, I did this, or, oh yeah, I've felt like that too. And sometimes it's just recognition that you're not the only one, and that you're not the only mad one in the room. But also sometimes there's stuff people go, oh, you should talk to this person. And that's how I was introduced to the Entrepreneurs Organisation. I bumped into Brian Keegan at a England-Ireland rugby match. A couple of things had happened, and I wasn't feeling in great form, and he kind of called me on it and said, you're not your normal bubbly self. And I explained what was going on. He just said, just phone, I'm going to send you an email, phone this person. And it was a link for the Entrepreneurs Organisation. And this is an advert for EO, but if you're there and you're new to this and you haven't reached out, you'd be amazed when you do reach out what people are willing to share and what they're willing to tell you about, and maybe some things that they've done in the past that didn't work for them, so you can bypass all those mistakes and get to a successful outcome. So just reach out. That there's some great people out there willing to share their experiences.
I think that's a wonderful note to wrap this podcast up on. I think the message there is you're not alone, and being a founder is often described as a lonely experience. But do you know what I think? To summarise the experience of the three of us, perhaps it doesn't have to be. And we've all benefited from that over the years as well. So thank you very much for listening to our podcast. This has been Founder Hacks. Remember, it is available on our website as a blog as well, if you would like to read rather than listen, and share with anyone you think could benefit from it. It's also a regular email update as well. So it remains for me to say a massive thank you, as ever, to Anthony Enright.
Goodbye.
And from Alex Moore.
Goodbye from me too. Thanks for listening.
So I've been Ben Thomas, we're Atomics, and this has been Founder Hacks. Thanks very much for listening.